Look at the bees going in and out. It's wonderful just to watch them. Watching the pollen balls coming in on their legs gives you a good idea of when the bees are collecting pollen and when they're not. You can see orange pollen coming in. There they all come. I was standing in their flight path. So all of a sudden they're all coming home now. So the theme for today is Are My Bees Hungry? So we're going to show you how to tell if your bees are hungry, and we're also going to do a flow frame inspection just to have a deeper look and a deeper understanding of what's going on inside this hive. So first of all, as usual, protect yourself. Wear your protective gear. I'm not going to wear gloves because I'm an experienced beekeeper, but if you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves, and even if you are experienced, have your gloves with you. This colony can get a bit grumpy sometimes, so I've got my gloves here at the ready to make sure I can put them on if we're part way through and the bees change tune. So a bit of smoke, get your smoker going. Now, good idea if you're in a fire prone area. It's nice and wet here at the moment, but if you are in a fire danger zone, always put your smoker down on something like a metal garbage bin lid to limit the chance of the smoker catching tinder on the ground on fire. My heart goes out to all those in California affected by the fires at the moment. So a reminder to be super responsible when you are dealing with fire, and that includes your bee smoker. Now, a few puffs in the front of the hive is all we need. I'm going to leave the smoker there while the bees calm. And while they're doing that, let's just have a little look from the outside of what's going on by opening these useful observation windows. So if we have a look at that, I can see areas of comb that are capped. And by that I mean the bees have put their wax capping over the top of the honeycomb cell. And I can see areas that are uncapped. And when you see it checkerboarding like that, where it's capped but then all of a sudden there's missing cells, that's showing you that they were on a flow once, they filled those cells up with nectar, they de-watered that nectar, produced their honey and capped it, and then they got hungry and they uncapped it. So that's a telltale sign of the bees getting a bit hungry, is when it's patchy. When they're filling and they're on a flow, it'll all be at a similar stage when you look across the comb surface. Now, as well as that, I can also see that there's some nectar glistening down the cells. So I can see that they have been hungry and now they're just starting to find a nectar source and pack some of that nectar into some cells. So that's a wonderful thing. So looking in these windows really tells a story of the history of what's been going on in your hive. And after a while you can really tune in on looking in the windows and understanding whether your hive's on a flow, whether they're hungry, whether they have been hungry, and whether you need to do anything about it. Now, let's have a look in the rear observation window. It also tells a story of the bees being a bit hungry. So I can see by the way that there's some full cells, totally capped, and then empty ones around it. So that's typical. They start to uncap, take some of that honey away, pull it away from the extremities of the hive, or use it to stay alive. After all, honey is their carbohydrate to live on, and bee bread or pollen is their protein source. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. We'll answer them. Trace will read them out. The idea is you're asking away and ask any question that might help you in your beekeeping or help you get started in beekeeping. So bees, flow hives, any kind of hives, ask away. This observation window looks really quite pretty because we've got some fresh comb there and the bees have eaten it away. So this tells a really clear story of the bees were on a flow, they filled it all up and then they got hungry and ate these sections away. So that patchy look is hungry bees. So what we might do is show you how to do a flow frame inspection. Not necessarily because we need to, but just because it's really useful to know how to do that, and also useful to have a look at what's going on inside the hive and match that up with your own ideas of what's going on by looking in the outside. And that just helps you learn about your bees. And also there's some tips and tricks of removing flow frames and putting them back again that we'll show you. Questions in the comments below. Stay tuned. Let's start pulling this top box apart. We're going to need our Hive tool. We've got our smoker already going. And what we're going to do is blow a little bit more smoke in the hive, because this hive we already know can get a bit grumpy at times. So let's just have a look at that when we take the roof off. We actually put a new queen in this a couple of weeks back, so let's see if their temperament has changed or not. First of all, removing the gabled roof and using our chisel tool to get underneath and pry off the inner cover. Now there's an excluder down here, so I don't need to look on here for the queen. I can just simply put that aside. So here's our flow frames. A couple of sugar ants nesting behind the key access cover here. You'll notice when they run into the hive that the bees will really have a crack at them. They don't let ants inside the hive. There it is there, getting chased right out again. Bees are really good at keeping ants out of the hive, however they don't have access to this area behind the key access cover, and we have mistakenly left a cap out, so some ants are nesting right down in this zone. So we need to get them to come out, and then we'll put that cap back on again. So when you're removing a flow frame, first of all, remove the rear access cover, the gabled roof, inner cover, and the key access cover. Then you're ready to take a frame out. Now the first one will be the hardest, just the same as any beekeeping. The first frame is squeezy. Use a bit of smoke to clear the bees away. And on this side it's pretty much like a normal frame. The J-hook goes under the end bar and you can lift like that. Now if it's really stuck because it's been a while, then you can lift a little bit there, then swap ends to this end. And we have two lifting points here. One is under there. We've left a little bit of a recess for your Hive tool. And the other one is down here if you need to get another vantage point. Once you've got it loose, you can slowly, carefully lift that first frame out. Okay, and what do we have here? We have brood in the flow frames. So that was a bit of a surprise. We requeened this, and it looks like the queen somehow snuck up through the queen excluder. The only place you can lay then is in the flow frames. So what we're going to need to do is shift the queen down into the brood box, which is easy enough to do. You can either find her and move her down there, or you can use a bee brush, brush all the bees off all the frames, which will include the queen, down to the bottom box, and then put your frames back in again. And we'll need to wait a couple of weeks before we harvest to make sure that any brood has emerged. So the brood cycle of a worker bee is 21 days. So we need to wait at least 21 days in case there's some eggs down the cells for them to all emerge, and brood won't damage the flow frames. They will function normally after that. So there we go. What else have we got? So we'll have a quick look to see if we can see the queen. And sometimes it's workers, but it could also be drones down the cells. And if I can find an advanced one, we'll be able to tell by the eyes. So they are drones. If you look at this bee head, the eyes are bigger and they're touching together in the middle. And so that's an uncapped larvae that's going through its metamorphosis, which they will do sometimes, especially when the cell's not the right size for them. Okay, so what we'll need to do is have a little look for the queen. If we find her, great. If we don't, no problem. We'll just brush all the bees down below. Now you can get into a situation where you've got a queenless hive and the workers are laying drones in the flow frames. Back to our question of, is this hive hungry? Now I can see fresh nectar going in here that they're just about to start capping. So that's a really good sign. Something started to flower, and that means we don't need to feed the bees. If we're seeing it all dry, nothing coming in, feeding the bees some sugar syrup would be a good idea. Any questions coming in as we move these bees and the queen down to the bottom box?
Yes, Seeds. A couple of people just asking, how would the queen have got up there? Was it when you requeened?
Okay, quite possibly through the requeening process, she might have been a newly mated queen and quite small and able to squeeze through that queen excluder. So that's possibly what's happened. We also need to ascertain whether there is a queen at all, because the worker bees can lay eggs and they'll lay unfertilized ones which will turn into drones. So we might need to continue with a brood inspection to see if there's any signs that let us know whether there's a queenless hive. Okay, this frame has a lot of honey around the edges, which is good. We've also got brood in it. And having a quick look for the queen, we'll go through. Now, as I'm manoeuvring this, I'm trying not to tip it over and tip the nectar out, but it's not going to fall apart now that it's all waxy and the bees have made it their own. So we can tip it on the side if we want to, just bearing in mind that the nectar might start to dribble out. See a bit of bee communication going on, some waggle dances. Keep the questions coming in.
Seeds, Robbie wants to know, just wondering what's the best way to clean the flow frames, and or is it actually necessary to do that?
So if the frames are left in the hive and the bees are looking after them, generally they will keep them clean for years. However, 5, 6, 7, 8 or now just about 10 years in, if you find your frames are really, the wax that they put on the frames and coat all the parts with is really built up and you're losing your nice view at the back here, then it could be a great idea to give them a clean. And that's what people are finding. If they pull the frames after 5 years or so, get a pressure washer out, lay the frame down on, say, a concrete slab or lean them up against a wall and blast down the cell lines. Set the frame to open position, blast down all of the cell lines, clean off a bunch of that old wax, dry them out, reset the frames, put them back in, and away they go again. Please don't throw your frames away even after 5 or 10 years use. We want them to last as long as possible. So clean them up, give them a new lease of life. But getting back to your original question, generally you don't need to clean your flow frame. Sometimes you can get into a situation where there's some honey build up in this trough area, and you can clean that out by taking the cap out and inserting the tube that comes with the kit for harvesting and drain away any honey that's building up in there. And that unblocks what we call the leak back point down here for you as well, which if all is functioning normally, honey never builds up in there, but of course bees will be bees and block up that little leak back point we've made. After harvesting, you'll get a bit of honey going into this area and then draining back into the hive. When you insert your tube for harvesting, that gets automatically unblocked for you. However, the bees will sometimes block it up and you'll need to manually clear that area. Don't go in there, little bee. You get stuck in there. There we go. Hey, I said don't go in there. That's it. All right. We're going to keep going with this inspection. As you think of your questions, put them in the comments and Trace will read those out. Okay.
Right, here's a good one, Seeds, from Charlene. She's just wondering, if you empty the middle frame, so take the honey out of the middle frame, will the bees move the honey back into the middle?
So here's the queen.
Oh.
So that's a bit of a win. Now what we want to do is make sure she gets into the bottom box, and we can do that quite easily just by popping it in the entrance. So right here, she'll walk in hopefully. If we can get her to walk in. Oh. Uh-oh. I just might have injured her a little bit then. Hopefully she'll be okay. In she goes. So the queen is now in the bottom box and she is in her right place, and hopefully she'll lay her eggs there and everything is now well. 3 weeks later the brood will have emerged from these frames and we can go about harvesting as normal when we see the honey stores are ready. Okay. Any questions? Keep them coming in.
Yes, Seeds, back to Charlene's one. Just wondering, if you take the honey out of the middle flow frames, will the bees then move the honey back to the middle?
So if you take the honey out of the middle frames, yes, generally bees will move honey from the extremities towards the centre of the hive. But the caveat on that is when the bees get hungry, they'll also eat from the middle of the hive, right above the brood nest. So generally the answer is yes. If you harvest these ones, the bees will then start filling them first and even start moving honey there. But sometimes you'll find when the bees are hungry, the centre above the brood nest has been eaten by the bees in kind of an archway. So bees do move honey around the hive all the time, and they'll move it from the bottom box to the top as well. So if you've harvested the frames up the top and there's a lot of honey stores down the bottom, that's a wonderful thing to do in springtime, because that means some honey can be moved from the bottom here to the top, allowing space for the queen to lay. Okay, let's keep going with our brood inspection. Adding a little bit of smoke because I noticed the bees were just starting to give me a few little warning buzzes where they would run into me. So that's the first telltale sign that they're starting to get a little bit protective, is they'll just give you little hits like that. And that's a good time to put on your gloves, get out your smoker and blow some more smoke into the hive and give them a moment to calm. Keep the questions coming.
Great. So Chris is up in Burleigh, which is just up the road from where we are here in Australia, and they recently bought a new flow hive on New Year's Day, purchased the nuke, did an inspection on the weekend, and they have nearly fully built out 2 blank flow frames with comb. Just wondering, Chris is saying, I couldn't see much honey stores. Should I feed them sugar syrup in this area to help with wax building?
Okay, so they built out 2 brood frames by the sounds of it. In the bottom you installed a nuke, which is a going little mini hive, a great way to get started, well done. And you put your wooden frames in beside, and they've already filled out 2 of those, so that's fantastic. If they have the resources to do that, you probably don't need to feed them. But have a look, if there's no honey stores in any of the comb, no nectar present, then by all means you can go ahead and feed them. You probably don't need to this time of year in Burleigh. Now, a way to tell whether they've got honey stores is looking down the cells. In this case it'll be in your brood frames, and you're looking for that glint of nectar, which you can see in these frames here. You can see a bit of a glint of nectar showing they are bringing in some nectar. Okay. Now, we don't necessarily need to look through all these frames now because we did find the queen and put her back in the bottom box. Hopefully she's okay. But it's just interesting to have a look at what's going on because we had the brood issue in the top box and the queen was in the wrong place. She must have snuck through the queen excluder when she was a newly mated queen and started to lay in this area. You can see the nectar here. It's a really good sign. I can stop worrying about the bees. They are bringing in nectar and they will have enough stores to keep themselves going. They probably don't have enough stores though to fill some excess frames for us to share some too, so we need to exercise some patience until such time as this flowers producing a lot of nectar and a nice healthy colony producing an abundance of honey for us to share. Great.
Now, Steve, you might have answered this, but Clinton's also wondering, well, actually, we've had a couple of people say a similar thing has happened to them with the queen getting up there. But Clinton's question is, how do you allow the drones to escape from once you close up the hive?
Great question. So when you put back on the lid, just leave a little gap. You can poke a twig under here. It only needs to be about 5 millimeters, a little gap here, for the drones to be able to escape. So you'll be doing that between the inner cover. Let's just give you a little example of that right now. So let's assume your hive's back together. You put your lid on like this. So that if all of your frames are in, then the drones, as you point out, won't be able to escape. But if we just get a twig, put it under there, and make sure you've got at least a 5mm gap, all of those drones can emerge. The drone cycle is 16 days, so if we wait 16 days, then we can take out that stick and your hive is back to normal.
Right. Not sure, I've got a question coming in saying, how do you prevent an excess amount of stickiness in the flow frames?
Excess amount of stickiness. So bees are generally good at making sticky stuff, whether it be propolis, wax or honey. So what you might be referring to is when the bees do, after a while, they build up the frame so there's a lot of sticky propolis and wax on it. Now these frames, if we have a look at this one's all honey, looking beautiful. This is a fairly new frame. It looks like it's been used just for 2 seasons and there's not an excess of wax build up on that. So if you find that there's a lot of wax and propolis build up to the point where your frame is challenging to open, as in you do it in segments but the parts aren't quite lifting because there's so much wax and propolis build up that you can't get them to move, then that's the time to shake the bees off, get your pressure washer out, blast a lot of the wax off and let that dry, and you can put that frame back in again. Of course, making sure you reset the frames for the bees to go again. And that can be a great way to fix that issue. There are ways in the field, if you find there's excess wax propolis build up, you could just get a butter knife and run it down in between the cell lines like that, and that will free up those frames so you can then harvest it. But again, if it's got that much build up of stickiness, as you say, then giving a good clean with a pressure washer will be the fix for that problem.
Right, this is a question from our Happy Hounds in Ireland. Happy New Year to you as well. They're just saying that they have ivy, which is a really solid type of honey to harvest. Could they just leave it in the flow frames for the bees at the beginning of winter?
Yes, absolutely. If you've got honey that's turned solid in the frames, sometimes, and we did experiments in the beginning by getting known honeys that would candy really quickly, and we would put the frames in a freezer, then put them back in, and then harvest and see what happens. So generally if it's a part candy, you'll get cloudy honey coming out, sugar crystals, the larger sugar crystals being left behind for the bees. However, you could just leave those frames completely for the bees. Sometimes attempting to harvest it will interrupt it enough for the bees to then tear off the capping and consume that candied honey, and then hopefully next time they're putting nice liquid honey that's easy to harvest. So yes, certainly you can get leave that candied honey for the bees. Generally it's not an issue because we're harvesting in the warmer month before the honey tends to go candied. So even with the known ones like rapeseed or canola, that does candy easily in the hives and is a pain for commercial beekeepers because they take a box of honey off, and on the way to the processing shed, which might be sitting around for a couple of days, it cools down, goes candy, then it's hard to spin out. Whereas we're harvesting when it's warm above the brood nest, when it's still in the hive, and if you harvest often, harvest early, you can actually harvest that honey before it goes candied, which is an advantage of the flow hive.
Fantastic seeds. Now Ben's just wondering, Seed, how has Varroa mite affected our hives here in northern New South Wales?
We keep looking for Varroa mites, but so far we haven't seen any in our area. They are now endemic in Australia, so eventually they'll be here. But right now we don't need to do any mite treatments or mite management in our hives. We just need to be on surveillance, doing our alcohol washes periodically.
Great. Cedar, now we've got Peter's just wondering, loving that window or the plastic Clearview hood. Just wondering, do you like using it, and also do we sell them?
Yes, absolutely. This is an innovation we came up with a while back, and you've got the best of both worlds here. You can zip this out and have the mesh if you like. Let's say you're getting fogging issues in winter time, you could zip in the mesh again, and that way you've got the options if you order the Clearview hood. Now, I like it because you get a better view to see down the cells and see the queen eggs. If you're looking through a mesh, it's just that little bit harder. So it's a good thing. And we've put a little Velcro at the top here because originally we were finding that the reflection was a bit distracting when it's further away from your face sometimes. It's not too bad, but pulling it up a bit closer limits that reflection and makes it nice and easy to see through.
Right, now here's Diana's in southwest Australia. They have a new flow hive all set up and ready to go, but in the meantime they've used a temporary hive that's been there for a year, and a swarm was collected and put into the temporary hive, and we haven't looked inside. So Diana's question is, how do we transfer the bees into our new brood box? It might be a real mess in there. Apparently there are frames. So it sounds like they've got a temporary hive. They've got brood frames, but they just want to put them into the new flow hive. Any tips on that?
Okay, so you won't know till you get in there whether there's wonky comb and things to clean up in your original hive. But starting with going a little hive, or even a full hive, is a great way to go because you've got a jump start on your season with an already strong colony, and you're doing a swap into your flow hive. So what you'll need to do is get in your bee suit, you're wearing your gloves, your smoker, and you're blowing some smoke into the hive, calming the bees, and then you'll go through the process of taking the hive apart, have a look what's going on, and that will let you know whether there's a mess to clean up or whether it's easy enough to transfer the frames to your brood box. Hopefully you can simply pull the frames, put them in your brood box down below here, and then if it's already a strong colony you can put your super straight on top, provided there is a honey season ahead in your area. Now the question will remain, if there's frames left over, what you do with them. So you could add another brood box to the hive and add spare frames to that one if you want. Or you could take the honey away if there's honey stores. Let's say if you ended up with some frames from the edge of the hive you purchased that were full of honey, you could take them away and enjoy eating that honeycomb, and that'd be one way to deal with excess frames if there is excess when you do your swap into your flow hive. Of course, if there's brood in frames, you don't want to leave them orphaned from the hive, so you'll likely need to stage it where you wait for the brood to emerge. So say you had your bottom box there, you put all the brood frames you can in that one, and then you put another box on top, perhaps one of your originals temporarily, and you put remaining frames in there. You wait for the brood to emerge, and then you can take them away and replace it with your flow super like this, and enjoy watching them start work on the flow frames. I hope that answered your question.
It sounds good. Maybe they can keep us posted.
Right.
Hey, so how many eggs can a queen lay in a day?
Amazingly, a queen, when she's in full swing, can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. So that's a busy bee. She's reversing down the cell, she's depositing an egg in the bottom, she's crawling out again, she's going and finding another cell, reversing down, and so on. So it goes on, and that will mean that you'll have 2,000 new bees, new eggs being laid, and if she keeps doing that, you'll have 2,000 new bees emerging into the hive every day. So that's a really strong colony when that's going on. But of course, she will not be doing that all the time, because that may be unsustainable if there's not enough resources coming in. So the bees as a colony are clever enough to adjust to what's going on in the environment to make sure there's not too many mouths to feed if the resources aren't available. So she may only lay a few eggs a day, or throttle right down to none in a cold, snowy winter, to make sure there's not too many resources to use during that winter time. And the bees will bunker down as a small little ball and just wait for warmer weather in the springtime.
Great, and a couple of people asking how to purchase and where, so if you just honeyflow.com, check on that site and it'll sort of send you into the right place to where you can get flow hives. And then one of the questions coming in about that is, could you use one in a smallish backyard?
One of the amazing things about beekeeping is you can keep bees, enjoy doing some farming, and produce a real amount of produce that you can share with your family and friends from a very small footprint. And especially with the flow hive, this is it. This is the area it takes up, because the honey extracting equipment is built right into the hive, which is our flow frame invention. So that way, without taking up a whole room in your house with a big sticky mess and all the equipment that goes along with it, all you need is this. So for that reason, flow hives are really popular on balconies in the cities, on rooftops and so on, because it allows you to do that thing that humans yearn to do, where you can do some useful farming, providing pollination, as well as producing an amazing amount of honey to share. So bees are great like that, so you'll find them in small backyards, balconies, cities, rooftops, in the snow, in the deserts, in the tropics. Very versatile species, Apis mellifera, the European honeybee.
Great, Cedar, with this hive, it's the Flow Hive 2 Plus, the cedar. Mark's wondering, do you need to paint all the cedar on the flow hive or just the roof?
So you can just leave the cedar wood natural. Now, only do that with the cedar wood because it has natural anti-microbial things in it which will protect it from wood rot. And you can just let the wood just go naturally grey, and you do hear of beekeepers having a bee box that's lasted 50 years like that. I'm not promising, but that is incredible for outdoor woodenware. Other species like the Araucaria won't last that long without a good coat of exterior house paint, and it still won't last as long as the Western red cedar. So if you can afford it, this wood is a very long-lasting hive, and you can either paint it with some of the decking products from your hardware store, or you can leave it just natural and let it naturally grey. However, the roof, I do think it's a good idea to paint, because otherwise this area cops it in terms of the sun and the rain and so on, and you'll get warping of the timbers and perhaps gaps, letting in a lot of weather and so on. So you want to create a good weather seal on top, and that way your hive will stay nice and dry.
Right. Will the eggs ever produce another queen? And if so, what do you do, or how does that work?
Will the eggs ever produce another queen? So let's say the queen dies. We're manipulating like we were doing earlier, and we accidentally squash the queen. Or for some unknown reason, the queen died. Then yes, the bees can utilise a recently laid egg, turn it into a queen. And the way they do that is they enlarge the cell by building on some more wax to it to make it into a peanut shaped kind of cell that's hanging down. And they'll feed that young larvae royal jelly for its entire gestation, and that means it'll turn into a queen. If on day 3 they feed bee bread or pollen, the protein will trigger that larvae to turn into a worker bee. So worker bees and queen bees start off the same, it's just what they're fed changes them into a queen or a worker.
Right, now we've got someone from Tassie wondering, are flow hives good in Tasmania?
Yes. Early on, 2015, I travelled around Tasmania, and it was amazing to just talk to conventional beekeepers down there about how they keep their bees, and visit some people who are setting up their flow hives. And since then, there's been lots of people in Tasmania keeping flow hives and getting great honey from them. So, like other areas, whether you're up in Alaska or in Europe or down south here in Australia is our coldest regions, this is the European honeybee, and it really is equipped for a very cold winter. So we have those cold winters in Tasmania, and what you'll need to do is just make sure there's enough honey stores for your bees to survive a long cold winter. And Apis mellifera is very good at that. They're very good at creating a lot of honey stores to survive a long European winter. So how much honey you leave will really depend, but get some local knowledge and also get it from more than one place. I was down there, one commercial beekeeper told me that if they didn't have 2 10-frame deeps full of honey on top of their brood box, their hive wouldn't survive. I went around the corner to another commercial beekeeper and they said, oh no, we just have the 8-frame Langstroth deep and 1 on top, and that's fine to survive the winter. So it does vary, the feedback you'll get, and in most cases the beekeepers you talk to are right for the given situation that they tested in. So get some opinions and then see what works for you. If you can keep your hive in a simple configuration, it's just a bit easier, but if you need to add multiple boxes and then pack it down for the winter, that's okay too. That's really common in the colder regions, to make sure there's enough space in the hive during a really bumper spring, and then reducing the size of your colony for a long cold winter.
Right. Craig's wondering, Cedar, how is it okay to leave the hives alone for extended periods if the colony looks nice and healthy?
Yes, unlike a lot of other farm animals, chickens and things, you don't have to be there to shut gates at night. In fact, you're not really keeping the bees. They're free to go as they like, and they will, for the most part, look after themselves. However, you do need to be a responsible beekeeper, do your brood inspections periodically and check for pests and disease. And also, if you notice a sudden drop in numbers or some observations outside of the hive that tell you that something might be up, then you do need to get in there and look after your bees and see what may need to be done. And we've got a wealth of training material to take you from square one right through to even a scientific knowledge of beekeeping. Have a look at thebeekeeper.org. It's an online course we put together, gets rave reviews, and it's a great way to learn from square one if you like great video training. Lots of experts from all around the world have pitched in on that. And we're also here each week. But yes, you can leave your bees for a long time and they'll look after themselves, but you do need to be a responsible beekeeper and do your brood inspections to make sure your hive is happy and healthy.
Right. So what's the best way to get a swarm or entice bees to settle in your flow hive?
So while you can make what's called a bait hive, the easiest way to get started is probably to get what's called a nucleus off a bee breeder. So that is a going little mini hive that's got wooden wax frames, and you install those 4 or 5 frames into your bottom box here. Put the rest of your wooden frames in, look after them, and they'll grow from there. And when they've built up with a lot of bees and are using all those frames, if there's a honey season ahead of you, you then add your flow super on top. And in some parts of the world, they like to add another box beforehand, whether it be a medium or a deep, and then add the flow super on top of that. Get some local knowledge on that. Flow hive beekeepers generally tend to start with the flow frames on top of the brood box, get the bees working them, and then if they need to add more supers, whether it be a medium or another deep or another brood, then wait for the bees to get a start on the flow frames first. Just that question again.
The easiest way to get a swarm or entice the bees into the hive.
Okay, back to your question. So that was getting started with a nucleus. Look after them and they'll grow. Now, another easy way to get started is take a split from a friend, and if you can do that with them in the springtime, you'll be giving them a service of taking some of the congestion out of their brood box, and that'll give you some frames with bees, with eggs down the cells is what you'll need, and they can raise a queen from that, and you can take away what's called a split. We've got videos showing you how to do that. But if you do want to entice bees into your hive, there are ways to do that. And what you'll need to do is situate your hive near a whole lot of other hives in the springtime. And you'll just use the brood box only, no super on top. And you might even like to add a little lemongrass oil into that bottom box to help lure in a swarm. And you might be lucky, a swarm might decide that that's a great home and move right in, and you'll have a going hive without having to purchase any bees.
Great. Now Robert's got 3 wild hives and tree hollows really close or next to his flow hive. Just wondering, what are the chances of the hive eventually being robbed?
Okay, so bees are good at defending their entrance, but if they get weak and nectar is scarce, then bees will sometimes turn to stealing honey from a weak hive. If you leave honey out for them, which is a no-no, then that will actually trigger the bees into searching for honey rather than flower nectar. And as you say, you can get robbing where bees will decide that stealing all the honey from an existing hive is easier than collecting nectar, and that can decimate a weak colony. But all being normal, generally it's not an issue to have lots of hives near each other, so you shouldn't have a problem having your wild hives in the trees nearby. In fact, most people, whether they know about it or not, there's usually some wild hives around in the forest nearby.
Right, now Robbie, hey Robbie, I think I've spoken to you quite a lot on the phone. Robbie's up to 8 hives and eventually wants to get to 25. So Robbie's question, Cedar, is how far apart do the hives need to be?
Okay, well done, Robbie. That sounds good. I'd love to see a photo of your hives. Now, commercial beekeeping, they will often put them wall to wall or four to a pallet, and the bees are clever enough to go back to their existing hive. You will get a little bit of drift between them, but generally it's not a problem to have them wall to wall. However, our hives have these useful observation windows, so it's a nice idea to put them far enough apart for you to get in and look through the side windows. So that would be at a minimum this far apart, so you can stand there, look in the windows and work the hive by standing between them. Now, if you don't want drift of bees from one hive to the next, then putting them 10 metres or more, one study said, was the distance you needed to do to not get drift of bees from one hive to the next. And you'd be doing that to limit any spread of pathogens. Conventionally, beekeepers will keep, say, 40 hives in one spot, or maybe 20, and then another apiary for another 20, and that's kind of quarantining any issues to a single apiary more so. So you can decide whether you want to spread them right out 10 metres apart, or you can put them as close together as you like.
Right, now William must have some cranking hives. William's saying that his hive is producing honey at a rapid rate. Sorry, we've got a noisy mower here. At a rapid rate, filling the box every couple of weeks. Just wondering if he should just keep harvesting the honey.
Absolutely, it's really fun when you get on a good flow and your colony is really healthy, and you harvest all the honey and they fill it up again, and you harvest again, they fill it up again. So make hay while the sun shines. It also helps your colony, limits them from getting overcrowded and swarming if you're making space in the hive. So go ahead and harvest the honey and store that honey in jars on the shelf, share it around to your neighbourhood, and it's a wonderful, exciting time, so good to hear.
And when's a good sign, or how do you know when to add the Flow Super?
So it's best to add the Flow Super when all of the frames in the bottom box are being used by the bees. They've drawn wax in them, they've got stores in them or brood in them, and there's a lot of bees in the box. If you add it too early, it's no problem if you're in a warm climate, but if you're in a cold climate, you're just adding more space to your hive that makes it a bit harder for your bees to keep the brood at the right temperature. So you may as well go ahead and add the super only once the bees are ready for it and they're needing more space.
Now Cynthia's wondering, can you still collect beeswax from a flow hive?
Yes, you can. You can collect honeycomb from a flow hive, and you can use that wax to then make candles or whatever you like at home. So the places you'll get that from are either when you do your spring management here, taking out frames from the bottom box. Usually there's honey on the edges, you can then take away, enjoy the honeycomb and save the wax, or you could do what Trace likes to do and add another box just for honeycomb collection. Or you could decide to collect honeycomb under the roof. So there is some space here in this gabled roof area. You can take out that plug and allow the bees to come up and make some honeycomb in the roof area. Or you might like to quarantine them to a smaller area using, say, a glass baking dish, so it's a bit easier to remove the roof and you can enjoy watching them build some comb up under the roof without it connecting to the actual underside of your roof panels. So it's another place to collect some honeycomb and some beeswax.
Right, now I've just got a question from Kalala asking about outdoor classrooms and non-profit grants. Best idea for that one is to email the customer support info at Honeyflow and they'll be able to get you sorted on that one. And now Claudia's asking, do bees ever start colonising in buildings or in roofs?
Yes, it is not uncommon for bees to decide a wall cavity, if there's an entry, or a roof cavity is a nice spot to set up a new home. So a swarm will leave a hive in the springtime if the hive is overcrowded, temporarily land on the branch somewhere. Scout bees will then go off measuring potential homes like cavities in trees or perhaps in a wall, and they'll come back and through a democratic process they will decide where to go, and off they'll go to that new home. And we have some videos showing you how to remove a colony from a wall cavity, which is usually a cutout where you take some panels off and cut the brood out and insert it into your flow hive brood box using rubber bands to hold that brood in place. And you can start a colony from a hive you've cut out of a wall.
Can beekeeping help wild bee populations? And if so, how are they sort of connected to a beehive and a wild beehive?
Okay, so in Australia we do have a lot of wild bees, being Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, and we've also got a lot of wild native bees. Now, the European honeybee, what it does is when the hive is overcrowded, the old queen will get kicked out by half the bees and they'll go and find a new home somewhere. So that does form wild bees, or what's called feral bees. And like it or not, they form an important part of pollination in Australia, and there's great concern with the varroa mite moving in that the bee population won't be there to do enough pollinating to sustain the agricultural pursuits in certain areas. So we've got all of that ahead here for us in Australia to see what happens when we lose those wild bee populations.
Fantastic. Now, we had a question coming in where one of the beekeepers was having real issues trying to put all their flow frames back into the hive. So someone else has tuned in and said, maybe when you put the frames back in, can you show how that you sort of slide them across and then make it easier to put the flow frames back into the hive?
Absolutely. Let's show you a few tips and tricks on how to put your flow frames back in the hive and get them all set so that you've got a nice window here and no gaps for bees to come out. So first of all, the frames are easy enough to put in just by dropping them in. Just pay attention as you drop down that you're not squashing any bees in this area here, and then go ahead and move your frame against the wall. Then we can go ahead and add the next one, and it's the last one that usually causes the trouble. So I'll show you how to deal with that. Again, watching this point down here, trying not to squash any bees as you put it down. Now I can see the bees need a little bit more smoke, and the smoke has gone out. So talking too long, we let the smoker go out. Not to worry, we'll continue anyway. And next you will be moving the frame across, making space for that last frame. Now normally I would smoke here so there's not a whole lot of bees in your way as you drop that last frame in, because the quarters get tight when you're adding that last frame. So a little bit of smoke is starting to come, there we go. And that'll just help move bees out of the way so you've got a clear working area for dropping in that last frame. Interestingly enough, they're festooning across the gap. Just missed showing an example of that. Okay. So next, when you drop this frame in, what I find it's easiest to do, I might even just shake some bees off this. There we go. Easiest to put this clear face against here first. And see the angle I'm holding it on, and as I slide down, I'm making sure it's keeping the space between the next two frames. Now, I've got the tail in on this side, and I'm slowly dropping it, but I'm keeping that slight angle to make sure it's keeping the distance between the frames. And then as you get close to the bottom, again just checking there's no bees in the way here, and now swinging the back of the frame down so that this is forming a nice flat window, brushing any bees out of the way, and that can then go down into position. So what you want to end up with is a nice flat panel across here with no gaps that the bees can escape.
Great, Cedar, you made that look so easy. So Megan, hopefully that helped you with putting your frames back in. Now Abdi's tuning in from Kenya in Africa, and Abdi, if you've sent us an email, just check your junk mail or contact customer support again. But also his question at the end of it is, what's the difference for Africa bees species for adopting onto a flow hive?
Okay, so I don't have direct experience with Africanized bees, but there is various species. So if you're in South Africa, for instance, there is the Cape honeybee, which has been proved to work with the flow hive, which is a subspecies of Apis mellifera. But then there's the Africanized bees that are now in other continents as well that have been proven to work in flow hives. But Africanized bees can be very aggressive, so get some local knowledge before you start beekeeping with Africanized bees, and make sure you are keeping safety as the most important thing.
Right. And Cedar, when you smoke the bees like that into the flow frames, does it change the flavour of the honey?
Yes, actually, if you've got a whole lot of open cells, and I used to find this harvesting conventionally, I would use a lot of smoke because I had pretty wild bees and I was trying my best not to squash too many, and I've got bees going everywhere and frames everywhere. And if the frames were, 70% capped, I would go ahead and take them anyway. But if you're not careful, you're blowing a lot of smoke over uncapped cells and you get quite a smoky honey flavour. It's not necessarily a nasty flavour, but if you are trying to sell your honey, then you probably don't want smoked honey, although it might go very well with some dishes.
Well, this could be a great question, Seeds, for you to finish up on. It's about basically how did you get into a career with bees, and did you study bees?
So I'm a learn as you go kind of guy, and I just jump in and learn what I need to learn to go forward. So bees for me were just a family tradition, if you like, keeping bees in the backyard. And then in my young 20s, I decided to upscale my beekeeping. So I was keeping 30 or 40 hives and harvesting conventionally and selling honey to local shops, and just learning as I went and reading books and things. But it was through that process that I went, hang on, this is an incredible amount of work. The bees aren't liking it. I'm sweating it out, lifting heavy boxes, squashing lots of bees, going through days and days of this processing to harvest honey conventionally. And that's where I thought, hang on, there must be a better way. And that sparked myself and my father on a decade-long journey of inventing the flow hive.
Great. Fantastic. It's always good to hear those stories. So a couple of people saying, this obviously is a 7-frame hive, so how many brood frames are there?
So we call it the Flow 7, and it matches a 10-frame brood box. So we've gone and confused things a little bit. There used to be just 8s and 10s. So 10-frame brood box, and we call it a Flow 7 because flow frames are a bit wider. And with some maths in the beginning, we worked out that we could size the frames such that you'd get 7 to match a 10, and 6 to match an 8-frame Langstroth brood box. So this is the Flow 7, 10-frame brood box, and the Flow 6 matches a 8-frame standard brood box.
Great. And so then, is it compatible with Langstroth beehives?
Yes, you can do some cutouts in your boxes and just add the frames, or we can also supply you with just the super and the frames, or you can get the whole kit and caboodle with your pest management tray, your stand, and everything to go along with it.
Great. Cedar, and the little ant caps at the bottom, what do you use to stop the ants from climbing up the hive? What do you put in the ant cap?
So with these ant guards, the way you use them is you open up the top here just by winding it up like that, and you can put either cooking oil or you could put in there some Vaseline. If you're having trouble with rats coming for the cooking oil, Vaseline might be a better option. You can put that in that lower cup, and also there's an area under here you can smear some as well, and that way the ants have a barrier they have to cross before they can get onto the hive. If you make sure there's no foliage touching the hive, you put in your ant barrier and then brush the ants from under the roof and behind these 1, 2, 3, 4 covers. Do that a couple of times, then your ant problems will go away till next time.
And fantastic, Cedar. And does it matter what sort of oil?
We just use vegetable oil here at the flow office, so just some cheap vegetable oil will do.
Right, and the question that we always get asked, Cedar, is how much honey can you expect to get out of a flow hive per season?
And that is a great question, and the answer, like many things in beekeeping, is it really depends. So the factors are you've got to have a strong colony that's ready to go and get a lot of nectar and turn that into honey, and a lot of flowers that are producing the nectar. When those two things coincide, it can get really exciting. Like somebody was chiming in earlier, they're harvesting all of their frames every couple of weeks and filling up again, harvesting again. But equally, you can get disappointing times where you might not get any honey in a whole season because simply the colony wasn't strong enough or the flowers weren't there with producing the nectar. And that can be a bit patience testing. But having more than one hive can increase your chances of getting good honey stores in a season. So while one hive might have found a good nectar source and might be nice and strong and producing good honey, another hive might be a little bit slow. So I always recommend building up your apiary to have more than one hive, and that will increase your chances of getting those bumper harvests and storing lots of honey to share with your family and friends.
Great.
Got time for a couple more questions.
Ah, perfect. Cedar, with the Western Red Cedar, another question again on the timber. Has this hive been sealed with something?
This hive has been sealed with something. It's been sealed with a new one from the hardware store. It's a product by Intergrain called Intergrain something.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Oh,
Intergrain Exterior Ultra Clear. So you can go ahead and try that, but you'll be trying it alongside. So I've never tested this one before, but it's holding up so far. And that was September last year that we put that on.
Oh, that was a good idea. To put the paint on the window.
And that was 2 coats. So let us know what works for you. We're always interested in new products that will help your woodenware last outdoors.
Right, and Cedar, do you just do the outside of the hive?
Yes, I just like to leave the inside perfectly natural for the bees, but you can paint all sides if you want to. Conventionally, beekeepers in the commercial setting would paint all sides of their box first by dipping it in preservatives and then using exterior house paint on all sides. They could make a standard pine box last for 20 years.
And are Italian bees the same as European bees?
Yes, so Italian bees are a breed of the European bee, Apis mellifera. So the breeds you'll get here, you'll hear Italian is probably one of the most common. They usually these golden looking ones, and then you'll get Caucasians, which are the dark ones, and you'll get Carnolians and all sorts of breeds, but they're all the same Apis mellifera, and you'll often find a mix in a hive like you see here, where you've got lighter coloured ones like this one here fanning away, and you'll often get darker ones as well. So that's just a case of different genetics. Here's a dark one here that it doesn't have that golden look. You're going to come up and show us your stripes. There we go. So that one doesn't have that golden colour. So that's showing that the queen is mated with a variety of different genetics, and that's what's producing different looking bees in the hive.
Right, now this is a good one about, because we've opened up this box and it had brood. Once the brood is hatched, will the bees put the honey back into those flow frames?
Yes, so provided there's nectar available, the bees will then fill those cells with nectar, and the fact that the bees use the flow frames temporarily for brood won't affect the function of the flow frames. So we're going to go ahead and put this hive back together now, remembering that there'll be drones in here that will need to escape at some point. So we'll leave a little gap for those drones to be able to escape just by putting a little 5mm shim or twig here to lift the inner cover up a little bit. So let's do that now. So this now goes back on, making sure our flow frames are all set, looking pretty, and looking around for a twig that might be able to help us. This is not so much a twig but a piece of grass, and for the purposes of the exercise I'll just pop that in here, making sure it's leaving a gap big enough for drones to escape. There we go. Now then, a little trick is, if you want that entrance to be on the front side rather than the back, you can then go ahead and put your gabled roof on backwards, and that will leave that area available for drones to fly out of that gap there between your super and the inner cover.
Oh, great.
Thanks for watching and all of your great questions. We'll be back same time next week. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and a big thank you to all of those chiming in, helping answer all the thousands of questions coming in. It's wonderful to see that community just helping each other and helping all those people with their new questions, providing a great space for people to ask questions in beekeeping as well. Thanks for tuning in to this week's live Q&A. Same time next week. See you then.